volume of Politics of the Spirit. Can this then not be true of Nikos Kazantzakis, when the author's biographer places political activity alongside religion in the context of the author's development as a thinker towards his aim of personal salvation? Now, we'll deal with that in the written version. And Kazantzakis' mature interest in politics and Venizelos starts in the year 1912. And we say mature because his first reference to him in a letter on December 18, 1902, at the age of 19, was one of contempt and dread. But now Venizelos, in 1912, supports Greece's involvement as an ally of Bulgaria in the impending war against the Ottoman Empire, and Kazantzakis, back in Athens, after completing his postgraduate studies in Paris, is full of admiration for the Cretan politician and is ready to be enlisted as a volunteer in the Greek army. Venizelos told me that there is no need for partisan bands, he writes to his sister Eleni, and this suggests a meeting between them. Please forget the English translation. As I said, it is due to technical problems. Consequently, since it is impossible for me to depart as a partisan, I live for the Thessaloniki army. What Venizelos has just done is great, a miracle. His name will be immortal. Without a doubt, he is the greatest statesman in the world today, and we are fortunate that we have been deemed worthy of viewing these miracles in our day. And a few days later, dear sister, journeys, marches, repeated fatigue, nights without sleep, and the culmination. Here I am in Athens again, and in Venizelos' private office. But King Constantine rejected Greek participation in the Dardanelles campaign on the advice of the Crown Council, comprised of former prime ministers, and the Cretan politician, on February 21, 1915, resigned from office. «Δε φαντάζεσαι τη λύπη μου», he writes to his sister. «Λυπούμε για την Ελλάδα, γιατί μόνον ο Βενιζέλος ήταν άξιος να την κυβερνήσει. Τώρα θα γίνουν εκλογές και ελπίζω να βγει πάλι ο Βενιζέλος. Πολλοί φίλοι μου θα εκτεθούν βουλευτές και εγώ θα δεχόμουν αν ήθελε ο Σακλαμπάνης να μου παραχωρήσει τη θέση του. Αυτόν δεν τον συμφέρει να μένει στην Αθήνα, να αφήσει το γραφείο του, το σπίτι του και να μένει εδώ. Γι' αυτό και πρόπερση του πρότεινα, μα δεν εδέχθη και φέτο δεν πιστεύω να δεχτεί. Αυτό με στενοχωρά, γιατί ήταν ευκαιρία να πολεμήσω στη Βουλή, τώρα που τόσο έχει ανάγκη ο Βενιζέλος από φίλους». Michael Saklabanis did not accept Kazantzakis' proposal. He was, by the way, the husband of his elder sister Anastasia. He stood for parliament, was successful, and became member of parliament of Venizelos' Liberal Party for Heraklion. But 3 years later, the author was presented with another opportunity to show friendship to his compatriots. He writes in the chapter entitled Καύκασος of his Αναφορά στο Γκρέκο. «Βρισκόμουν ακόμα στην Ιταλία όταν έλαβα από την Αθήνα, από τον Υπουργό της Κοινωνικής Πρόνοιας, τηλεγράφημα αν δέχομαι να αναλάβω τη Γενική Διεύθυνση του Υπουργείου με ειδική αποστολή να πάω στον Κάφκασο, όπου κινδύνευαν πάνω από 100.000 Έλληνες και να προσπαθήσω να βρω τρόπο να μετακομιστούν στην Ελλάδα, να σωθούν. Πρώτη φορά παρουσιάζονταν στη ζωή μου η ευκαιρία να μπω στην πράξη και να μην έχω πια να παλεύω με θεωρίες και ιδέες και Χριστούς και Βούδες παρά με ζωντανούς, σάρκα και κόκαλα ανθρώπους. Δέχτηκα και για έναν άλλο λόγο. Πόνεσα την αιώνια σταυρωμένη ράτσα μου που κινδύνευε και πάλι στο προμηθεϊκό βουνό του Καυκάσου. Δεν ήταν ο Προμηθέας, ήταν η Ελλάδα καρφωμένη πάλι από το κράτος και τη βία στον Κάφκασο. Αυτός είναι ο σταυρός ο δικός της και φωνάζει τους ανθρώπους, τα παιδιά της να τη σώσουν. Let us note that the previous year, on November 1, 1918, he had asked by letter his friend Yannis Stavridakis, consul of Greece in Zurich, to ask Venizelos to appoint him somewhere in the east with the title of consul, in Beirut, Jerusalem, or still further away, but always in the east, in order not to die of the boredom of inaction. So we don't know whether there is this demand had been granted. He's placed at the head of a 3-member committee, including Colonel Iraklis Polemarchakis, and instructed to investigate and to report on the Pontus question. Now Pontos, from the Greek word evxinos pontos, is first found in Xenophon's Kyrou Anabasis. Hence, several states or provinces bearing the name extended roughly from Kolchis, Chrysomalon, Deras, and so on, that is modern-day Georgia, well into the hinterland, through Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods, culminating in the late Byzantine Empire of Trebizond. Έφυγα από την Ιταλία, he says, πέρασα από την Αθήνα, πήρα μαζί μου μια 10 διαλεκτούς συνεργάτες, τους περισσότερους κριτικούς και έφυγα για τον Κάφκασο, να δω από κοντά πώς θα μπορέσουν να σωθούν οι χιλιάδες αυτές ψυχές. So let us go over the facts. In January 1919, Greece was among 15 countries, including Britain and the United States, fighting the Bolsheviks, alongside the French, of course, who endeavored to establish themselves in the ports of the Black Sea with a view to penetrating through the Ukraine into the rich in coal region of Donetsk. The Bolsheviks succeeded in driving back the French and the Greek armies, who had to evacuate the lost zone of defense in Odessa and to retreat in April through Romania and the Black Sea towards Constantinople. And the Greeks of Pontus found themselves in the direst situation. This is a tragic period of Greek history. Earlier this year it was revived with the publication of a historical treasure of the period, kept since 1996 in the Archive of Contemporary Social History in Athens. It is the diary of the expedition to Russia of Nikolaos Sbarounis Trikorphos, the head and later, at a later stage, a politician of the military hospital in Odessa, and it is disturbing to read this account of the agony of the physician to set up a medical unit, to nurse this endless number of Greeks brought to him from all parts of blood-stained Caucasus, as he said. So this is how the author now, Kazantzakis, describes their plight 4 months after the Greek army's retreat, when he arrived in Caucasus. Από τον νότο οι Κούρδοι πετάλωναν όσους Έλληνες έπιαναν και από το βορρά οι Βολσεβίκοι κατέβαιναν με φωτιά και με τσεκούρι και στη μέση οι Έλληνες του Μπατούμ, του Σοχούμ, της Τυφλίδας, του Κάρς κι όλο και στένευε γύρω από το λαιμό τους η θελιά και περίμεναν γυμνοί, πεινασμένοι, άρρωστοι το θάνατο. Το κράτος πάλι από τη μια μεριά, η βία από την άλλη, οι αιώνιοι σύμμαχοι. He immediately sends, upon his arrival, to Minister of Social Welfare Spiridon Simos, a dramatic cable. Είναι να μη αποθανώσει εκπίνης και κακουχιών Έλληνες πρόσφυγες, δέον όπως όταν επιστεί ο καιρός επιτευχθεί οργανωμένη και ταχεία η παλινόστησης αυτών. Ευρισκόμενοι μεταξύ αλληλοσυγκρουωμένων φυλών, κινδυνεύουσιν τη στιγμή ταύτην να εξολοθρευθώσιν από τους προχωρούντας εκ της Αρμενίας και Αζερμπατζίας Κούρδους Τατάρους. Επιτροπέ εξ αυτών επανειλημμένος πέβδουσι να εκλιπαρίσωσει διεμού την ελληνική κυβέρνηση να μην τους αφήσει να χαθώσει. Οι πλήστοι εγκατέλειπον ήδη την γλώσσα των καταστάντες τουρκόφωνοι ή ρωσόφωνοι και μετά την αχρόνων δεν θα υφίστανται πλέον ως Έλληνες. Indeed, most of them had become Russophony. Russia had from the beginning regarded them as her own people. She called them Caucasians, and he who was willing to say, I am Caucasian and not Greek, automatically became Russian. Γιάννιε Ρούφσκι, Γιάννιε Γκρέκ, Για Καυκάσκι Τσιλαβέκ, learned Greek children in Russian school. I am neither Russian nor Greek. I am Caucasian. Minister Simos' reply obliterates Kazantzakis' hopes. Αντίξωε πολιτικές περιστάσεις. Μεταφορά προσφύγων εις ελευθέραν Ελλάδα θα πέβαινε ολεθρία και ανθρωπίνος και εθνικός δι' αυτούς. But a new cable brings new hope, a solution, and is sent from Paris and Prime Minister Venizelos. Λαμβανομένων υπόψη απολειών ελληνικού πληθυσμού, Μακεδονίας και Θράκης, ανερχομένης εις 150.000 περίπου ανδρών, εννοείτης ότι οι 100.000 Ελλήνων Καυκάσου είναι κεφάλαιων εθνικών και οικονομικών μεγάλης σημασίας. Η δαπάνη είναι ου μόνον εθνική, αλλά κατεξοχήν παραγωγός και δεν πρέπει να διστάσουμε να την αντιμετωπίσουμε. Encouraged by the Prime Minister's response, Kazantzakis departed for Versailles with a view to proceeding to Macedonian Thrace to oversee the settlement of the refugees. He bore the memorandum on the entire refugee question ready for Venizelos. The Greek Prime Minister saw him within a day, listened to him with interest, asked him questions, agreed to everything he said, but was too exhausted by the peace negotiations to make a decision. He induced him to consult on the issue with the Metropolitan of Trebizond, Chrysanthos Philippidis. Metropolitan Chrysanthos Philippidis was one of the enlightened intellectuals who had seen from the beginning of the century the creation of an independent Greek state in Pontus as the only means of survival. He was also the person who had been chosen in November 1918 by the enraged Pontian societies during their large convention in Paris to present their case on the fringes of the peace conference to the Entente. Their basic argument was that the partisan forces of Pontus would be able to cut the Kemalist supply lines by the Soviets if they were strengthened by a Greek military corps for the funding of which the Pontians had even collected money. Succumbing to pressure, Venizelos sent to Pontus Colonel Dimitrios Katheniotis and Consul Ioannis Stavridakis, Kazantzakis' friend, to assess the situation. In the summer of 1920, he received their reports urging him to accept Pontian demands right away. Leaving aside his own notion of a joint Pontian and Armenian state, he announced to the British Prime Minister Lloyd George his intention of creating in Pontus an autonomous Greek state. But it was too late. In Greece, the pre-election campaign had already started. Άνθρωπος που με επανάσταση κατάλαβε την αρχή και δικτατορικός εκυβέρνησε τόσα χρόνια, πώς και γιατί θυμήθηκε το Σύνταγμα και ενήργησε εκλογές αφού το ξέρε πως θα χάσει. Kazantzakis writes in a letter dated December 1921. Kazantzakis' letters to Stavridakis and to Galatia had already unfolded the author's aversion from Venizelos and affiliation with Metropolitan Chrysanthos. There has never been, on the part of Kazantzakis, actual integration with the ideological realm of Venizelism, says Professor Pavlos Dzermias, author of the book The Political Kazantzakis, That Famous Unknown Person. And this, of course, became evident after the collapse of the Venizelist version of Greece of the two continents and five seas. Kazantzakis, says Professor Dzermias, did not speak or act like a disappointed Venizelist. Actually, the Asia Minor disaster, Kazantzakis regards as an opportunity for rebirth. Of course, he was accused again. If I remember correctly, another time was on one of his 3 visits to Spain, of being in favor of war. But he writes to Galatia on October 22, 1922. Έτσι με την καταστροφή αναγεννήθηκε η Ρωσία και η Γερμανία. He goes on to a comparison with France, whose victory reached the peak of atimia, the word he uses, by strengthening her capitalistic system. Anyway, from 1921 onwards, when he observed the Bolshevist movement, the Bolsheviki, his interest was captured by communism. The year before, on July 31, 1920, August 13, the day following the failed attempt to assassinate Venizelos in Paris, had been assassinated his hero Ion Dragoumis, former consul of Greece in St. Petersburg. And it is interesting to note that 5 years before, in 1915, Consul Dragoumis had resigned from his post, unable to participate in negotiations favoring exchange of populations. In the fruit of Kazantzakis' involvement with Caucasus, Christ crucified, continues Professor Dzermias, the author gave us his social gospel. On the surface, he took up the subject of refugees, associated it with the Passion of Christ, and created a novel with many moral elements. But beneath the surface of the exciting story is hidden the deeper drive of action, and then we go back to we'll discuss that in the written form. The condemnation of a morally unjust world where the wicked prosper and the good suffer. We should say that after the persecution survived in the Caucasus 172,811 Greeks. From the end of March 1920 to November 1921 were transported from Batum to Thessaloniki in 2 lots on 23 steamships, 52,878 people and 7,737 animals. The number of people would be much higher, but 7,000 or 8,000 had already died on the way to Batum. Of those who made to Thessaloniki, 20 to 22,000 died soon afterwards. Of how many animals perished, there is no record. Είχα προφτάσει να εκτελέσω την εντολή που μου είχαν εμπιστευτεί. Ήμουν λεύτερος και έδωκα την παραίτησή μου. Runs of Kazantzakis. Και ευτής γύρισα το πρόσωπό μου κατά της Κρήτης, να πατήσω το χώμα της, να αγγίξω τα βουνά της, να πάρω δύναμη. As another great man this time a Britain, Sir Winston Churchill once said, in war you can be killed only once, but in politics many times. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation, and we still have some time for questions.